For some time now, I've thought about sharing what happened to me, but shame always held me back. Today, I feel the need to let it all out. Because perhaps someone reading this is experiencing something similar and it may serve as a warning or an imp. For years, I believed I was in the perfect marriage. We were two college students with huge dreams who promised to support each other above all else. I was a finance major and passionate about detecting risks in balance sheets that others overlooked. He was a tech major, always brimming with revolutionary ideas. We swore there would be no competition, that every achievement the other achieved would also be our own. I truly believed in that pact, and for a long time, I acted as if it were the solid foundation of my life. After graduating from college, I launched my own small consultancy from home. It wasn't anything fancy. A borrowed desk, an old computer, and plenty of coffee to power through long days. Still, I had successes. That filled me with pride. One of my reports helped a client avoid losing millions in a fraud, and I was even quoted in a financial newspaper. Meanwhile, my husband was starting from the bottom in startups, and I was there for every interview, every disappointment, every small triumph. When they offered him an important position in Seattle, I didn't hesitate. I closed my client portfolio, packed everything, and followed. I kept telling myself that it was a step forward for both of us, that there were no compromises, just commitments to our future. Over time, I began to notice small cracks in that promise we'd made to each other. At first, they were subtle details. At dinners with colleagues, he no longer referred to me as the woman who breaks up scams from her desk, but as someone who did home-based consulting or small projects to pass the time. At those times, I smiled, swallowing my discomfort, convinced it wasn't worth arguing over a comment. But inside, I felt the image of a business partner fading away and the label of wife with hobbies slowly appearing. It was painful because I knew the true value of what I did, but I was beginning to notice that I no longer counted in the same way for him. The arrival of Tyler, his direct supervisor, finally tipped the balance. She was one of those people who knew how to hurt without raising her voice. She greeted me kindly, but always found ways to make me look ridiculous. She called my job quaint, as if it was something. Quaint, and laughed at the fact that I helped small investors instead of being in the real game. The worst part was watching my husband absorb her words. Little by little, he stopped listening to my market analysis, and every time we talked about something financial, he responded with, "Tyler says, the woman I shared my life with had begun to see me through someone else's eyes, not her own." The exclusion grew silently but steadily. Every time there was a corporate event, Tyler managed to make me feel out of place. Meetings scheduled right when I had commitments. Invitations to the wives in a condescending tone that made it clear I didn't belong there. At home, Ryan no longer shared important decisions with me or sought my opinion as he had before. He simply repeated his boss's phrases as if they were commandments, while my contributions took a backseat. I felt like the partnership we had built was transforming into a hierarchy where he was the professional with a capital C, and I, a mere decorative appendage. The hardest blow came at the company's annual gala. I had eagerly awaited that evening, thinking it would be the opportunity to once again show that I was still someone of worth. I prepared for weeks, studied market trends so I could converse effectively, and carefully chose an elegant yet understated dress. However, upon arrival, I was faced with the worst humiliation of my life. The sign in my seat with my name had been replaced with one that read pathetic, "Gold digger, nobody." I heard the laughter around me, saw how the entire room enjoyed the cruel joke. And the most painful thing was seeing Ryan silent, motionless, without uttering a single word in my defense. That night, as I tried to stay upright amidst the stares, I felt something inside me break. It wasn't just the public humiliation, but the certainty that I was alone. The man who had promised to be my ally became an accomplice to the silence. I left the event as best I could, my hands shaken and a lump in my throat that prevented me from crying at that moment. But deep down, that wound also ignited something. I realized I could no longer wait for someone to stand up for me. If I wanted to regain my dignity, I would have to do it on my own. The next day, still feeling queasy, I opened my laptop and returned to what I did best: analyzing data, looking for inconsistencies, and detecting fraud. I began reviewing the reports from the company where Ryan worked and found strange patterns: inflated earnings, suspicious stock movements, doctored balance sheets. The more I read, the more evident it became that there was a fraudulent scheme behind it. That's when I decided to create an anonymous profile on financial forums, Equity Watchdog 47. Under that pseudonym, I began publishing detailed reports with charts and evidence to back up every word. It was my way of reclaiming the voice they'd tried to steal from me. At first, I thought my posts would go unnoticed, like so many other reports that get lost in the internet, but the opposite happened. Reports began circulating among investors and journalists, and I soon received private messages from internal employees confirming what I had discovered. Some sent me documents, email, screenshots, even presentations showing how results were manipulated to deceive the market. Each new piece of information reinforced the magnitude of the fraud. It wasn't a simple accounting error. It was a scheme designed to inflate the company's image and benefit a few. The domino effect was quick to follow. My reports were shared on financial networks. Stocks began to plummet, and the SEC announced a formal investigation. Newspapers ran headlines almost daily, and for the first time in months, I felt like my voice had real weight. The most shocking part was when emails were leaked showing that Tyler had actively participated in these practices and, worse yet, that he had organized the humiliation at the gala as a form of intimidation. The woman who had seemed untouchable began to become the target of all the accusations, and with her, she also dragged my husband, who had been her loyal shadow. When Tyler was suspended from a position, the news spread like wildfire across every financial news site. Her image as a brilliant executive collapsed overnight, replaced by that of someone capable of manipulating results and humiliating others to maintain control. Ryan, who had staked everything on his closeness to her, was caught in the same web of his colleagues stopped trusting him, and the opportunities that had once seemed endless suddenly closed. From the outside, I watched that fall with a strange mix of pain and liberation. It wasn't easy to watch someone you loved sink, but I also knew he'd made decisions that led him there. I, on the other hand, decided to cut that ties completely. I left the house we shared and moved into a small apartment I rented with my own savings. At first, I felt lost, surrounded by boxers and silence. But I also breathed a peace I had known for a long time. It was the first time in years that I didn't have to mince my words to avoid upsetting anyone, that I could once again think about my own projects without feeling belittled. Shortly after, I received a proposal from an investment fund that had closely followed my anonymous reports. They wanted me to lead a research and risk area. I accepted without hesitation. It was the recognition I had waited so long for, but above all, it was the opportunity to believe in myself again. The contrast with my previous life was stark. I went from being introduced as the wife with home projects to sitting in meetings where my analyst determined investments worth millions. Every time one of my reports predicted a loss or pointed out a risk others had overlooked, I felt like I was regaining a part of myself. My new colleagues treated me with respect, listened to my arguments, and asked for my advice. Didn't need to mention what had happened because my work spoke for itself. It was strange, after so much humiliation, to feel valued again, almost as if I were rediscovering myself. Meanwhile, the news about Tyler and Ryan kept coming out. She was facing formal charges of fraud and manipulation, and he had been completely sidelined from the industry. In 6 months, everything had reversed. Those who had laughed at me at the gala were now reading my analysis in financial publications and citing me as a reference in specialized forums. And although many people asked me if what I felt was revenge, the truth is that what predominated was relief. Relief at no longer depending on someone else's validation, at having proven to others, but above all to myself that I was never a nobody. The most symbolic thing of all happened one afternoon when I was invited to give a talk at a conference on financial ethics. I stood in front of a packed auditorium, speaking about the importance of detecting patterns of fraud and how analytical independence could save not only investments but also careers. Afterward, several people approached me to express their gratitude, saying that my anonymous posts had given them the strength to report irregularities in their own companies. Hearing this moved me deeply, because I understood that what had been born from my personal pain had become something much bigger, a collective voice against corruption. That night, when I got back to my apartment, I opened a bottle of cheap wine, like the ones we used to open in college to celebrate any achievement, and thought about everything that had happened. I remembered the initial pact with Ryan, the laughter at the gala, the tears I'd swallowed, and I realized that the true alliance I needed was with myself. I was no longer the woman reduced to waifu, nor the one who had to endure complicit silences. I was someone who had fallen and gotten back up stronger, someone who had transformed humiliation into a driving force. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with what I saw in the mirror. From that moment on, I focused on building a life that no longer depended on anyone's validation. My days were filled with demanding but rewarding work, and my nights were dedicated to learning new things or simply enjoying the silence without fear of being judged. It was curious, what had previously weighed on me being alone began to become a space of freedom. I didn't need to measure my words or my actions. I could be myself again without the constant filter of comparison. And although loneliness sometimes hurt, it also taught me to value the independence I had sacrificed so much in the past. Meanwhile, I watched the case against Tyler progress through the courts, and Ryan slowly disappear from the professional scene. I received a couple of emails from him in the first few months, messages mixed with apologies and excuses, which I decided not to respond to, not because I held a grudge, but because it no longer made sense to open that door again. I had learned the hard way that you can't sustain a life on a pact that the other person breaks without remorse. Looking back, I understood that the humiliation of the gala was the breaking point, but also the beginning of my reconstruction. If I hadn't experienced that betrayal, I might never have discovered what I was truly capable of. As the months passed, my name began to appear in financial analysis articles and radio interviews about fraud prevention. At first, I was embarrassed to hear my own voice in those spaces, but later I understood it was a natural recognition of years of quiet effort. What had once been seen as a home hobby was now valued by high-level professionals. Every time someone told me they relied on my reports to make investment decisions, I felt like a cycle had closed, as if all the times they'd underestimated me had finally found their answer. One day, I received an invitation to collaborate on an advisory committee for an institution that worked on corporate transparency. I accepted without hesitation. There I met people who had been through similar situations, professionals ignored, fired, or humiliated for reporting irregularities. Sharing experiences with them gave me even more perspective. I realized that my story wasn't an isolated case, but part of a larger problem where many voices were silenced. That support network became another way to heal, because it reminded me that I no longer had to carry what I had experienced alone. Although my life had taken a new direction, there were nights when the memories came flooding back. I would close my eyes and listen again to the laughter in the room that time, the murmur of people reading the humiliating sign on my table, and Ryan's stillness, watching without doing anything. Those memories hurt, but I learned not to repress them. They were proof of what I had overcome. I told myself not to forget, because from that pain came the decision that changed everything. I turned those memories into a reminder that I would never again allow anyone to silence my voice. At the same time, I began receiving messages from women who had read my story on forums or in articles and who shared their own experiences of contempt and humiliation in the workplace. Some told me that my example had encouraged them to file complaints or leave toxic relationships. These testimonies moved me deeply because I understood that what I had experienced, painful as it was helping others not feel alone. It was as if the wound had transformed into a useful scar, not only for me, but also for those who needed to see that it was possible to rise again. I particularly remember a message from a young woman who wrote to me saying she'd been on the verge of abandoning her career because her partner constantly told her her job had no future. Reading my story, she found the strength not to give up and to look for a new job where she was. Valued. These kinds of responses made me cry more than once in front of the screen, because they reminded me of myself a few years ago, doubting my own worth because of the words of someone who was supposed to support me. It was a painful reflection, but also a confirmation that it was worth it to share what happened to me. Little by little, my routine stabilized. Work, new projects, and even the simple habit of cooking for myself without feeling judged became small symbols of independence. Had learned to enjoy my own company, to fill the silences with music or books I'd always wanted to read. It was as if I had reclaimed parts of my identity that I had kept hidden for years. Sometimes I wondered what my life would have been like if I had never followed Ryan to Seattle. But I quickly stopped myself. It wasn't about erasing the past, but rather understanding that even the most painful things could lead to a new beginning. Over time, I also faced the ultimate test: seeing Ryan again. We met by chance at a downtown cafe months after our separation. He looked haggard, with an air of defeat that contrasted with his usual arrogant confidence. He looked at me as if he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. I nodded briefly and continued on my way. At another time in my life, I might have felt the need to hear an explanation or an apology. That day, however, all I felt was distance. It was as if he was no longer part of my story, but a closed chapter. That experience confirmed something I'd been slow to learn. I didn't need closure from them. I'd found true closure myself. The day I decided to pick myself up after the gala and reclaim my voice through my reporting, I understood clearly in that instant. It wasn't external justice that had freed me, not even Tyler or Ryan's downfall, but the fact that they had chosen me. It was a strange feeling, as if I could finally let go of a weight I'd carried for years. 6 months after that chance encounter, my life was nothing like what it had been. I had solidified my position at the investment fund and led a team of analysts who respected and valued my judgment. Every time an important decision was made based on one of my reports, I felt that cruel label from the gala, pathetic gold digger, nobody lose further weight, becoming a powerless memory. Sometimes I even laughed to myself, thinking about how they had tried to reduce me to an insult, never imagining that that very moment would become the impetus the first needed to be reborn. Today, looking back, I don't feel proud of Tyler's downfall or Ryan's even though they are inevitable consequences of their own choices. What truly fulfills me is having regained my dignity, my independence, and the certainty that I don't need anyone else to validate me for who I am. I learned that underestimating myself was their biggest mistake, but also my opportunity to prove to myself what I was capable of. And although I still carry the scars, I now know they are part of my strength. They are proof that I survived and that no one else will ever be able to define me as a nobody. Today, I share this story here because I know what it's like to feel invisible, ridiculed, and trapped in a place where it seems no one hears your voice. I want to be clear that it wasn't easy, that there were days when I thought I didn't have the strength to continue. But I also want to be clear that it's possible to get back up, that even in the midst of the most painful humiliation, there can be a spark, a decision that brings you back to yourself. My spark was that poster at the gala. What they did to destroy me ended up being what rebuilt me. If anyone reading this feels at that breaking point, I can only say one thing. Don't ignore your voice. Don't minimize it. No one who loves you should make you feel less than. And even though it hurts to start from scratch, believe me, it's worth it. Today, I look back on my life and know I don't need anyone to give me a title to have value. My story isn't one of revenge, but of recovery. It cost me scars, but it gave me back something priceless. The certainty that I was never a nobody.